The Puppeteer's Child. I found the puppet on the first day I cleaned out my late Aunt Lydia's house. It was buried in a dusty old trunk tucked away in the attic's darkest corner. The afternoon light slanted through the small attic window as I pried open the heavy lid. Inside lay moth-eaten quilts, a porcelain teapot, and a ventriloquist-style puppet about 2 feet tall. The puppet was exquisite in a ghastly way. Its face, carved of cracked wood, painted a sickly pale. It wore a tiny formal black suit with tails, now frayed and smelling of mildew. Its glass eyes caught the light and seemed to stare back at me, a faint smile painted on its thin lips. A shiver prickled my skin in the warm, stale air of the attic. For a moment, I could have sworn something shifted in those glass eyes, an almost eager glint, but I shook off the feeling as a trick of the light. I reached in and lifted the puppet out. It was heavier than expected, the wood dense and solid. "Well, hello there," I mumbled nervously as if expecting a reply. Its hinged jaw hung slightly open, revealing small teeth carved in its grin. Up close, the workmanship was detailed. Rosy cheeks faded with time, fine lines drawn for eyebrows tilted in an expression of perpetual mischief. One of its hands was curled into a pointing gesture, the other fashioned to hold something, perhaps a prop missing now. I gingerly moved its head. The neck joint creaked. A cloud of dust puffed off its little suit, making me cough. Underneath where the puppet had been lying, I noticed something else in the trunk. An old leather-bound journal and a folded clipping of newspaper, yellowed with age. I picked them up, curious. The newspaper clipping's headline was blurred, but I could make out a date, October 14th, 1956, and the words, "Puppet Show Tragedy. Fire claims dozens." Before I could read further, a sudden thump from behind startled me. I whirled around, heart kicking at my ribs. The attic was silent. The only sound was my own breath. I scanned the dim space, wooden beams and sheet-covered furniture casting weird shadows. Nothing seemed out of place. Probably just the house settling, I told myself, or maybe a bird on the roof. I realized I was clutching the puppet tighter than I meant to. For a fleeting second, I had the inexplicable notion that it had moved in my hands, but it was as stiff and lifeless as ever when I looked. Chuckling at my jitters, I tucked the puppet under my arm, took the journal and clipping, and made my way downstairs. Aunt Lydia's house was an old Victorian on the outskirts of town, and it had always felt a bit eerie, even when she was alive. She'd been a collector of odd antiques and had traveled extensively. Growing up, I only visited occasionally, and the house always smelled of candle wax and old wood. Now, with her gone and the furniture draped in sheets, the place felt hollow and haunted by absence. I set the puppet down on a high-backed armchair in the parlor. Its body slumped slightly, head tilting to one side. Those glossy eyes faced me, catching the dimming daylight. "I'll deal with you later," I muttered, trying to ignore the silly feeling that it was watching me. I busied myself with the other items from the trunk. The newspaper clipping was fragile, so I carefully unfolded it on the dining table. The article described a disastrous fire at a traveling puppet show in 1956. A renowned puppeteer and several children in the audience had died in the blaze. The puppeteer's name caught my eye: Gregory Dwyer. There was a mention that his signature puppet, beloved by audiences, was never found in the aftermath. A grainy photo showed a man in a top hat, smiling next to a small boy, holding a puppet that looked strikingly familiar. The same painted face and formal suit, now sitting in the next room on Aunt Lydia's armchair. I felt a chill creep along my spine. Could it be the same puppet? It seemed unlikely that a random antique in my aunt's attic would be an infamous lost puppet from a 1950s tragedy. Yet the resemblance was uncanny. I sat down and opened the leather journal, hoping for answers. Inside the front cover, in neat cursive, was written "Property of Lydia Marsh," my aunt. She had written diary entries. Flipping through, I saw dates from 2 years ago up to just a few months before her death. Skimming for anything relevant, I found an entry that mentioned a puppet, August 17th. I acquired a puppet today at an estate auction, a beautifully crafted ventriloquist dummy in a tiny tuxedo. Something about it called to me, perhaps simply the artistry, but I feel uneasy. The auctioneer seemed relieved when I took it off his hands. I swear the thing's eyes are following me around the room even now. It gives me the queerest feeling. I swallowed. Aunt Lydia was a very no-nonsense woman. Seeing her write about queer feelings was surprising. I read on. September 5th. The puppet, I've begun calling him Little Tommy, is more unsettling by the day. I wake at night hearing creaks on the floorboards, but I find nothing. This morning I found Tommy, not where I left him. I had placed him on the hall shelf, yet he turned up on the rocking chair by my bed. I live alone. There's no explanation. It frightens me, but also I feel a strange pity. Sometimes in the dark, I think I hear soft crying down the hall. When I edge open my bedroom door, the sobbing stops, and I find Tommy sitting there in moonlight, tears of red paint on his cheeks. Surely my imagination. I don't know what to do. Maybe I'm just not sleeping well. Reading this, I felt the air in the room turn cold despite the summer evening. The image of Aunt Lydia, a stoic woman, being disturbed by this puppet, sent a surge of adrenaline through me. I glanced toward the parlor. From my seat at the dining table, I could just barely see the top of the puppet's head propped in the armchair in the other room. It hadn't moved. Had it? I shook my head and continued. September 22nd. It's not my imagination. Little Tommy moves on his own. I awoke at 2 a.m. to the sound of faint footsteps pattering in the hall. I lay frozen, listening as they stopped outside my door. I dared to open it, heart in throat. Tommy was there on the floor, sitting upright against the door as if he'd been listening. His head was tilted up toward me. In the darkness, I swear, I saw a grin wider than I'd painted on his wooden face. I've covered the mirrors in the house. I keep catching fleeting reflections of a small shadow that isn't mine. I'm at my wit's end. Tomorrow, I'll seek help. Perhaps a priest or medium. I don't want to give Tommy away to unsuspecting hands. I fear what might happen. The next entry was several days later, with shaky handwriting. September 30th. Father O'Leary came to bless the house. The moment he stepped into the parlor and saw Tommy, he went pale. The puppet laughed. I heard it plain as day, though it never moved its mouth. The sound came from all around, a child's giggle echoing. Father O'Leary left in a hurry, muttering Latin. I can't rely on outsiders. I must confront this myself. I've locked Tommy in the old trunk in the attic and tied it shut. I hope that contains whatever this is. I pray for strength. My hands were trembling by the time I finished reading the entries. Aunt Lydia died in October last year, presumably of a stroke in her sleep, according to the coroner. But now I wondered if little Tommy had a hand in it, directly or indirectly terrifying her to death. And here I was, alone in this house with that same puppet, now out of the trunk and sitting downstairs. A floorboard groaned in the hallway, and I jumped. The house was settling again, or something else was moving. I realized dusk had fallen. The only light now was the dim orange glow from the setting sun through the front window. The corners of the room were cloaked in shadow. I needed light, and I needed to put that puppet back in the trunk. Taking a steadying breath, I stood and grabbed a flashlight from my toolbox. All right. Time to tuck Tommy back in, I whispered to myself, trying to sound braver than I felt. I walked into the parlor. The armchair was empty. The puppet was gone. My heart lurched. I clicked the flashlight on, sweeping the beam around frantically. The chair where I'd left him was vacant, indented slightly on the seat cushion where the puppet's weight had been. I was certain, absolutely certain, I had not moved it. And I was alone in the house. A scrabbling sound came from the hallway beyond, the one leading toward the bedrooms. It was the sound of something wooden, lightly dragging or tapping against the wall. My mouth went dry. "Hello?" I called shakily. Only silence answered. The flashlight's beam trembled in my hand as I aimed it down the dark hallway. The shadows danced as I moved, tricking my eyes. But about halfway down I caught a glimpse of something small ducking into my aunt's bedroom. It was quick, a flash of a black tailcoat, a pale wooden face peeking around the doorframe for an instant, before vanishing. A chill sweat broke out on my skin. This couldn't be real. Maybe I was exhausted, stressed from the day. Maybe my mind, primed by Aunt Lydia's journals, was playing tricks. But that puppet is not where I left it. I knew this as a fact. I fumbled in my pocket for my phone and dialed my best friend Jake. He picked up after a couple of rings. "Hey, you still alive out there in Haunted Mansion?" Jake's voice came through cheerfully. I realized I was breathing hard and forced myself to speak slowly. "Jake, something is wrong here. I think I need help. Can you come over?" My eyes never left the dark doorway of the bedroom down the hall as I spoke. His tone changed immediately. "What's going on, Mark? You sound freaked out." "I am freaked out," I whispered, creeping slowly down the hall. "Remember the puppet I told you about? The one I found? It's moving by itself." Saying it aloud felt absurd, but the words spilled out in a rush. "I know how it sounds, but I'm serious. I just saw it, Jake. It's running around or something." He was silent for a second. That sounds crazy, man. But I can hear in your voice that you believe it. Are you sure someone isn't in the house? Maybe a raccoon or, I don't know, a prank?" I swallowed. The attic window had been closed. No animals could get in easily. And a prankster hiding in a dusty trunk for months was impossible. "It's not a prank. Just, please come. I'm at Lydia's place, and I don't want to be here alone right now." "I'm already grabbing my keys," he said immediately. "I'll be there in 20 minutes. Stay on the phone with me, okay?" Relief flooded me. "Okay," I breathed. With Jake on speaker, I felt a bit less alone. I moved cautiously toward the bedroom where I'd seen the puppet slip away. "You got a weapon or something?" Jake was asking as I crept forward. Weapon. Good idea. I glanced into an umbrella stand by the hall closet and pulled out a sturdy old walking cane that had belonged to my uncle. I gripped it tightly. "Got something," I murmured. The door to Aunt Lydia's bedroom was slightly ajar. The room beyond was pitch black. I nudged the door fully open with the tip of the cane, flashlight beam slicing into the darkness. The beam passed over the bed, dusty, covers undisturbed since her death, and the old vanity with its mirror shrouded in a white sheet. Aunt Lydia had indeed covered mirrors. Nothing unusual so far. I stepped in listening. Jake's voice was faint. "Mark? You still there?" "Still here," I whispered. I scanned the floor, the corners. No puppet. Maybe it wasn't this room, but I was sure I saw it. A soft, scritch-scratch sound came from under the bed. My stomach clenched. The beam of the flashlight trembled as I slowly angled it down, crouching. The light inched down the side of the bed frame to the gap beneath. Dust and shadows. And then I saw it. Little Tommy's pale face was peering out from the darkness under the bed, lying on its side. His glass eyes shone in the flashlight beam. The painted smile looked eerily wide in the stark light. I yelped and jumped back. Simultaneously, there was a burst of static, and Jake's voice panicked. "What happened?" "Mark, he's under the bed," I hissed, heart hammering against my ribs. I could hardly believe I said he. It. It was under the bed. It hadn't moved when the light hit it. It lay there as lifeless as any toy. Gathering my courage, I inched forward and extended the cane under the bed. I nudged the puppet. It slid a few inches, limp. No reaction. With a quick motion, I hooked the cane around its middle and dragged it out into the open. The puppet's stiff body rolled out onto the hardwood floor at my feet. I kept the light trained on it, half expecting it to spring at my throat. It did not. Little Tommy just lay there, arms askew, staring at the ceiling with that frozen grin. If not for the circumstances, I'd think it was just an innocent, discarded plaything. But my skin prickled. I couldn't forget the sight of it darting out of view moments ago. "Mark, you okay?" Jake's voice broke through. I got it, dragged it out. "It's just lying here now." I realized how dumb that sounded. There was a long pause from Jake. "All right. That's good, right? Maybe it never moved at all and just fell or something." He was grasping at logical straws. "It moved," I insisted quietly. "I saw it. I think it's playing dead now." The words felt insane, leaving my mouth, yet I knew they were true. Jesus. Jake cursed under his breath. "Okay, listen. I'm about 10 minutes out. Just hang tight. If it starts moving again, whack it with that cane, I guess." I stared at the puppet on the floor. How ridiculous, and yet how horrifying that I, a grown man, was ready to bludgeon a puppet that might attack me. "Just hurry," I said, voice tight. I hung up the phone to keep both hands free. With one hand, I kept the flashlight trained on little Tommy, and with the other, I slowly reached down and picked it up by the back of its coat, keeping it at arm's length. It dangled limply, its small feet in scuffed leather shoes swinging as I lifted it. A wave of revulsion and fear swept through me. The puppet's head lolled forward against its chest. I decided to put it back in the attic trunk and secure it like Aunt Lydia had. Maybe that would keep it still until Jake arrived. I carried the puppet, its wooden body bumping against my leg, and walked carefully back toward the attic stairs. The house was silent except for the thudding of my heart in my ears. Step by step, I climbed the narrow attic staircase, flashlight guiding the way. The air grew stuffy and cold again as I reached the top. The trunk was there, lid open where I'd left it. Rope and chain lay coiled beside it. Aunt Lydia must have used those to tie it shut. I lowered the puppet into the trunk, not daring to take my light off it for even a moment. It settled among the quilts. Its eyes, though aimed upward now, no longer reflected the light directly, giving them a dull, dead look. That odd glint I imagined earlier was gone. With a shaky sigh of relief, I gently closed the lid over little Tommy. The muffled thud as it shut felt satisfying. Immediately, I wrapped the rope around the trunk twice and tied a thick knot. Then I added the chain, looping and padlocking it. My aunt's keys were still on the dresser in her room. I fetched them and found one that fit the padlock, snapping it securely. "Stay put," I murmured at the trunk, half a taunt, half a plea. Suddenly, a heavy bang sounded from inside the trunk. So loud the lid jolted. I stumbled back, nearly losing my balance. Another bang, and the trunk itself shuddered as if something inside was throwing itself against the sides. My mind flashed to Aunt Lydia's entry about hearing knocking from the attic. I clutched the cane, breath caught in my throat. The banging stopped abruptly, leaving a ringing silence. The rope and chain held. The lid remained closed. I waited, tense, for another thump or a scrabbling sound, but none came. Perhaps the puppet realized it was trapped and had given up. Or perhaps it was planning. My blood was roaring in my ears. I stumbled back down the stairs, slamming the attic door shut and even dragging a heavy side table in the hallway in front of it to block it. I didn't know if that would do any good if the thing somehow got free, but it made me feel slightly better. I met Jake at the front door moments after. I must have been a sight, sweating, pale, clutching a cane with wild eyes. He stepped in and immediately put a hand on my shoulder. Jesus, Mark. Breathe. I'm here. Having another human there, the spell of terror broke just a bit. I exhaled a shuddering breath I hadn't realized I was holding, and nodded. Thanks for coming, I managed. Over a couple of stiff drinks from Lydia's liquor cabinet, I recounted everything to Jake. The journal entries, seeing the puppet move, trapping it in the trunk. The more I talked, the more surreal it sounded. Yet in that dark house, with shadows dancing in the corners, Jake didn't laugh or roll his eyes. He listened, brow furrowed, glancing nervously toward the ceiling when I described the banging in the trunk. After I finished, Jake ran a hand through his hair. This is beyond messed up, but I believe you, man. I saw your face, and honestly, I kind of want to see this thing for myself. I grimaced. I really don't think that's a good idea. He gave a weak chuckle. No, probably not. But if what you say is true, we can't just leave it here either, right? We need to do something. What if it gets out and, I don't know, comes for you? Or someone else? The thought made my stomach drop. Aunt Lydia had tried to contain it and died. What if the puppet caused her death? If I left now, would it eventually break free and follow me? The idea of that thing loose in the world made my skin crawl. Jake stood up, resolute. Let's deal with it. Right now. Before it possibly breaks out of that trunk. Deal with it how? I asked, though I suspected his answer. He held up his car keys. We take that trunk outside, open it up, and burn the little monster. Wood burns, right? We'll torch it to ash. That should kill whatever mojo it has. I hesitated, fear and relief swirling in me. Destroying it felt righteous. But a strange pang of sadness hit me too. Memories of the journal's hints of a lonely child sobbing. Was there really a child's ghost attached to that puppet? If so, was burning it an act of mercy or cruelty? I pushed the thought aside. The thing had killed people. Or at least tried. It wasn't an innocent. All right, I agreed, pulse quickening. Let's do it, but carefully. We prepared first. Jake fetched an old hammer and fireplace poker as extra weapons. I grabbed a can of lighter fluid from under the kitchen sink and a box of long matches. Together we slid aside the table, blocking the attic door. I put my ear to the door and listened. Silence. We exchanged a glance. With a deep breath, I opened the attic door and shone my flashlight up. Everything was quiet and still. The trunk sat in its place, rope and chain secure. We each grabbed an end of the heavy trunk and lugged it, grunting, down the attic steps, through the hall, and out the front door onto the wraparound porch. The night was moonless and still, the air thick and warm. Crickets chirped obliviously. It was jarring how normal the outside seemed compared to the nightmare scenario inside. We carried the trunk into the backyard, which was large and overgrown. Beneath a gnarled oak tree, we dropped the trunk in the dirt. Jake retrieved an old metal wash tub from the shed and placed it nearby, perhaps thinking of using it to contain the fire. My hands were shaking again as I unfastened the padlock with Aunt Lydia's key. Jake stood back with the hammer raised, just in case. On 3, I opened it and stepped back, I whispered. He nodded, face tense, feet planted. 1, 2, 3. I unlocked the padlock and yanked the chain and rope away. Then I flung open the trunk's lid and stumbled back, nearly tripping. Jake stood ready, but nothing burst forth. The puppet lay inside exactly as we left it, on its back among quilts, arms at its sides. It almost looked peaceful. I realized I'd been holding my breath and let it out. Jake edged closer, peering in. So that's the troublemaker, huh? He swallowed. Even in the faint light from the porch lamp, little Tommy's face was visible, that ceaseless grin and blank eyes. Jake rubbed his free hand on his jeans. All right, let's get him out. I moved to grab the puppet, but Jake stopped me. Use something else. Don't touch it with your hands. Good idea. I took the hooked cane, snagged it under the puppet's arm, and slowly hoisted the puppet up and out, dropping it onto the grass. It flopped on its side. Limbs splayed unnaturally. Now that I saw it outside, with faint stars overhead, it looked almost pathetic. Just a weathered old toy. Could it all have been in my head? I wondered for a split second. Aunt Lydia's journal, my fear. Maybe we both were just unstable? But then I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The puppet's head was slowly turning, just a few inches, until its face was looking directly up at us. Neither of us had touched it. Jake staggered back, nearly dropping the hammer. "Oh God," he gasped. Before I could react, the puppet's mouth opened with a sharp click, and a sound emerged. A small plaintive wail, like a child crying. The voice was high and filled with despair. It sounded far away, yet right here, echoing from the dark trees around us. The pitiful crying rose into a ragged sobbing. I felt frozen in place, hair standing on end. Jake shouted, "Do it, Mark!" Now, snapping me out of my trance. With shaking hands, I fumbled the cap off the lighter fluid and splashed it in a broad arc over the puppet. The liquid doused its face and suit, darkening the fabric. The puppet's sobbing sound hitched and turned into a shrill scream. A noise, so piercing and filled with rage that I stumbled back, covering one ear with my free hand. The puppet's glass eyes were fixed on me. Even in the dim light, I saw something like hatred flickering there. Jake swore and, in a surge of adrenaline, stepped forward and swung the hammer down. Crack! The hammer struck the puppet's torso, sending it rolling. It lay face up again, a jagged split now visible in its chest, where stuffing or wood should have been. But from the crack, something thick and dark oozed out, dripping onto the grass. It almost looked like blood, but black as tar and tarry. The stench of sulfur and rot burst forth, making us gag. The puppet let out a gurgling snarl, an inhuman wet sound. Its tiny wooden hand twitched, fingers curling. I didn't wait to see more. With a shaking hand, I struck a long match against the side of the matchbox. It flared to life. Without hesitating, I tossed the lit match onto little Tommy's fluid-soaked body. For a heartbeat, nothing. Then whoosh! Flames exploded across the puppet, orange and angry. The fire eagerly consumed the doused clothing, racing up to the painted face. The puppet's eyes seemed to burst in the heat, little popping sounds, boiling away whatever resin or glass. Yet I almost thought I saw those eyes still turning inwards, looking at its burning body. The mouth opened and closed rapidly with loud clacks, as if chattering or screaming silently now. From within, the fire came a rising shriek that did not sound like a child anymore, but like something ancient and full of fury. It was a howling screech that made my insides feel like jelly. I stepped back farther as the flames roared taller. Jake grabbed my arm, pulling me away as heat blasted our faces. We watched in horrified awe as the puppet's form blackened and charred. Its limbs writhed within the inferno unnaturally, not just wood warping. It was moving, thrashing as it burned. The head twisted to one side, the jaw opening in a final contortion. Finally, with a crack, the torso split completely and the puppet collapsed into a heap of flaming debris. The shrieking ceased, echoing off into the night, leaving only the crackle of fire and the rustling leaves of the old oak. We stood there panting, eyes locked on the bonfire we'd created in the wash tub, and on the ground around it. I hadn't realized tears were on my face. Whether from smoke or terror, I wasn't sure. Jake's face was illuminated by the fire, eyes wide in disbelief. "It's done, I think," he said quietly after a long silence. I nodded, unable to speak for a moment. In the flames, the puppet's shape was disintegrating into black charcoal and ash. The awful ooze that had leaked out sizzled and burned as well, giving off a foul smoke. I covered my mouth and nose with my sleeve. We stayed until the fire died down to embers, making sure there were no more movements or sounds. I doused the remains with water from the garden hose, just in case, and the last flames hissed out. In the end, all that was left in the tub and dirt was a pile of scorched wood fragments, melted buttons from its suit, and twisted wire from its inner joints. Among the ashes, I spotted one of the puppet's glass eyes, blackened and cracked, but somehow intact, staring sightlessly upward. I took a deep, shuddering breath. It felt like we had just battled a demon. And maybe we had. Jake put a hand on my shoulder again. "You okay?" I let out a nervous laugh. "Ask me again in the morning. But yeah, I think so. Thanks to you." I nudged the charred eye with the toe of my boot, sending it rolling into the wash tub with a clink. "And thanks to fire." The attempt at humor fell flat. My voice was still shaking. We cleaned up as best we could. We left the remains in the wash tub to cool, planning to bury or scatter them come daylight. Neither of us wanted to touch it that night. Exhausted and shaken, we went back inside. I offered Jake the guest room to crash, and he gratefully accepted. Neither of us was eager to part company after what we'd witnessed. Despite the ordeal seemingly being over, sleep did not come easily. Every creak of the old house set me on edge. I kept picturing that puppet's burning face, the hate in its eyes as it screamed. In the small hours of the morning, I finally dozed off, mind and body worn out. I dreamed of a small boy. He stood in the backyard under the oak tree, watching me with eyes full of sadness. In his arms, he held a charred puppet. "Why did you burn me, Daddy?" the boy whispered in a voice that echoed like it was in a vast hall. I tried to speak, to explain or apologize, but I couldn't move or make a sound in the dream. The boy's face blackened and cracked like burning wood, his eyes turning to glass. He opened his mouth in a silent scream, and I jolted awake with a cry. Morning sunlight streamed through the window. I was drenched in sweat, heart pounding. It took a long moment to remember where I was. The events of the night came rushing back. I almost expected to hear small footsteps in the hall or a child's laugh, but the house was quiet. The silence felt peaceful rather than ominous now. Jake and I went to the backyard after breakfast, both of us quiet, still processing. We dug a hole at the far end of the yard and carefully dumped the puppet's charred remains and that cracked glass eye into it. As the ashes fell, I caught a whiff of that sulfuric stench again, and I shivered. We filled the hole and covered it, placing a flat stone on top. "Good riddance," Jake murmured, patting the soil with the back of the shovel. I nodded in agreement, though a part of me felt a pang of melancholy, thinking of whatever tragic story had created that monster. We never truly learned the puppet's full origin, but between Aunt Lydia's journal and the newspaper clipping, I had pieces. Gregory Dwyer, the puppeteer, died in a fire alongside children. Perhaps his own child's spirit had been bound to the puppet, twisted by the flames and loss. Little Tommy. Was he Gregory's son? A nickname for Thomas or something? The diary never explicitly said, but it fit. I imagined Gregory Dwyer's despair, trying to cheat death or preserve his son in wood and paint. Or perhaps the puppet was a vessel for something else that came through during that tragedy. We would never know the full truth, and maybe it was better that way. Before we left Lydia's house, I collected her journal and the newspaper clipping. I felt they should not stay here. I intended to read them thoroughly later, maybe even try digging up more history, but part of me feared stirring up any lingering essence of little Tommy. Perhaps it was wiser to let it all rest. Jake left around noon, after insisting I crash at his apartment for a couple of nights. "Just so you're not alone," he said. I didn't argue. The The thought of spending another night in this house, even with the puppet gone, was not appealing. As we locked up and walked to our cars, I took one last look at the attic window. I imagined Aunt Lydia peering out, watching us with approval for finishing what she couldn't. A sense of closure washed over me. Yet, as I climbed into my car and shut the door, I felt an odd weight in my chest. A flicker of nagging doubt. Was it truly over? The puppet's body was destroyed, yes, but the spirit that moved it. Could you burn a spirit to ash? I tried to dismiss the thought. I'm writing this a week later, from the safety of my own apartment, hundreds of miles from Aunt Lydia's house. Life is returning to normal, though nightmares still trouble my sleep. Sometimes, in the dead quiet of night, I jerk awake certain I've heard the faint sound of little wooden feet tapping across my floor, or a tiny knock 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 on my closet door. Each time, I hold my breath and listen for as long as I can stand, hearing nothing but my pounding heart. I tell myself it's just the lingering trauma playing tricks. Last night, though, I awoke to a sound that set every nerve on edge. A soft, hushed giggle from the darkness at the foot of my bed. My throat clenched as I slowly reached for the lamp and switched it on. The room was empty. Nothing was there. On the floorboards, however, I found sooty black footprints about the size a puppet might make, leading from my bed to the closet. And then they stopped. There was nothing in the closet when I flung it open, hands shaking. I haven't slept since. Perhaps it's an overactive imagination, or maybe a final prank of my mind. I plan to visit Aunt Lydia's grave today and say a few words, hoping to calm my soul. I'll also stop by the yard and check that burial spot, just to reassure myself that all is undisturbed. But as I write this, in the corner of my eye I keep seeing a shadow just behind me. Small and childlike, with a pair of glinting eyes watching patiently. Every time I turn, it's gone. Perhaps little Tommy will never truly let me go. Maybe the puppet itself burned, but the puppeteer's child remains, lingering just out of sight, waiting for the moment I finally close my eyes. If you ever find an old puppet in an attic, leave it there. Some strings can't be cut. If that story sent shivers down your spine, don't forget to hit that like button, drop a comment on your favorite creepy moment, and subscribe to Spooky Chilling Tales so you never miss the next nightmare.